Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Functional View into Supply Chain Response Management conference call. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If at any time during the conference you need to reach an operator, please press the star 0. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Trevor Miles. Please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us. It's myself. I'll be presenting near the beginning of the session, and Bill Dubois is going to give you a very able demonstration later on, but would also add some color commentary as we go through the slides. So the title, as described, is a functional view of supply chain response management, and we just want to compare and contrast what that is with respect to planning, supply chain planning, as well as go into some characteristics that are required to be able to do response management very effectively. So let's first look at the issues that companies need to address and why response management has become a topic of great interest. And this is really the fact that if you look at the extended supply chains across the world, especially in high-tech electronics or clothing or many other areas that have outsourced quite a lot from US-based or Western economy-based manufacturing, and placed a lot of that into the emerging countries. Then what this has meant is that there are multiple tiers within the supply chain that need to understand and be able to react to changes that occur, but also because of those extended lead times in the supply chain, impacts that happen quite far down the supply chain need to be monitored and brought forward so that people understand what that means in terms of their ability to satisfy demand. But perhaps the greatest cause of the need for response management is the fact that products are becoming more and more specialized. There's more and more of the long tail, the so-called long tail that is needing to be addressed because of product proliferation. As customers demand more and more specialization in the product, that necessarily means a higher degree of configurability of the products, especially in high-tech electronics, which then in turn means that it's much more difficult to predict or forecast what customers actually want, so that when they come in to place the order, then there's usually a mad scramble to try and understand whether there's capacity and materials available to be able to satisfy that. So this describes very much the idea that, yes, we all need a plan. We all need to have some prediction of what it is that we think the customers are going to buy, because we need to understand whether we have enough capacity, whether through contract manufacturers or our own manufacturing facilities, as well as being able to place bets on long lead time components that we need to purchase to be able to bring those in so that when demand does hit, that we're able to respond and satisfy it. So everybody needs to do that level of planning. But a key aspect then of the next stage is to be able to monitor how the demand is actually coming in and compare that against what you thought was going to be coming in, and then be able to understand how you can most profitably respond to the real demand. That is the essence of response management. So you need a plan, but you need to then monitor how you're doing against actual, how the actuals are doing against what you're planning to do, and then be able to respond very quickly. And it's not only us who are saying this. Companies such as McKinsey, and in fact the Harvard Business Review recently had a series, in fact in their September articles, all about learning to live with complexity. And complexity is really the issue that I was talking about, product complexity, product proliferation, plus of course the supply chain complexity that has arisen from outsourcing and offshoring. So, but McKinsey really captures the idea here that it is very difficult to predict the future, and therefore what you need to be able to put into place is this responsive supply chain so that you can survive and flourish under any possible future. So we'd like to describe over the next few minutes what that really means in terms of capabilities, but I want to emphasize the the demand volatility that is driving this need to be responsive in the supply chain. So if we look at top CPG companies, and this is a study that was done by Terra Technologies, we see that the average mean percent error with a 1-month lag at the customer and item level ranges between 31% and 12%, meaning that the forecast accuracy is anywhere between 57 and 81%. So in the very worst case, the CPG companies, you might as well throw a dice and you more or less come up with the forecast that you had last month and decide whether it's going to go up and down, because the forecast accuracy is not much better than that. Some of them are doing quite a lot better with 81%, but what I'd like to compare and contrast that with is where they were 8 years ago. So there's been a significant but fairly moderate increase in the forecast accuracy. But if we compare that in high-tech electronics, where they have much more frequent and much more rapid new product introductions, and let's face it, it's a lot more difficult to forecast when there's very little history and your product is changing very frequently. Anecdotal evidence where we talk to prospects and customers, they're struggling to get that forecast accuracy above 50%. So the real question here is, where is your next breakthrough of performance going to come from? Is it really going to be learning to plan and forecast better? We see that the CPG companies have struggled over 8 years to get their forecast accuracy from worst in class of 31% to worst in class of 57%, so that's an 8% increase. So most certainly there's been some improvement, but is it really an area of diminishing return? Or are you going to be able to get much better profitability and if you're going to be able to respond very accurately and quickly to planned variance? So you plan to do something, the market is asking for something different, how can you most satisfy demand while not losing your shirt, doing that most profitably? Same thing actually even on the supply side. The tsunami in Japan is a big event that everybody is aware of, but there are daily issues that on the supply side where suppliers might decommit, equipment might fail, where this has a direct impact on your ability to satisfy demand, and being able to balance all of that very quickly is a key component of response management. Now just swing a little bit over to the traditional planning process, and we can see that there are many organizations, this is Oliver White, but many other organizations have described the overall planning process, and it's not much different from what Oliver White has described, where you see business planning to sales and operations planning, master scheduling, etc., all the way down to execution. The key point, everybody assumes that execution is going to happen flawlessly. Well, how can it happen flawlessly when the best you could do was forecast your demand accurately by 50%? Clearly, there's quite a lot that is going to happen in execution that you did not expect. Otherwise, your forecast accuracy would be much higher. So the key point is, yes, you need a plan, but you also need to be able to put into place this capability to respond very quickly. In the CSO Insights from Supply Chain Digest in 2009, they published a very good insights into really the merging of planning and then execution. And this is a very important aspect, because if you see what they're talking about is, let's pick on some of the particular issues. First of all, that separation between planning and execution, the differentiation is blurring. This is going to need and drive organizations to become much flatter, and therefore be able to operate in a true team environment across functions. And by across functions, I mean also across organizational boundaries, especially where manufacturing has been outsourced to contract manufacturers. You need to be able to get that greater visibility across different functions in order to be able to coordinate the response across the entire supply chain. But the key point is that at the execution layer, people have to take action. There's no and nothing to be gained by saying, oh, we need to take this to our central planning organization to see how best we can respond to this particular demand that we did not expect. Because by the time you get back to the customer, it's very likely that they have decided to go elsewhere to satisfy their requirements. So this all drives to the fact that planning processes are starting to merge with actual execution. And if you really think about it, the process of responding to an unexpected event is no different really than the process of planning for an expected event. Meaning you still have to take the same situation into consideration and the same KPIs. When you are trying to plan against forecast, what you're trying to decide is what capacity should I have, how much postponement should I put into place, what resources should I use to satisfy that demand, where should I buy components to be able to satisfy that demand. But those are the decisions that you need to make in the short-term execution window. People have tended to throw inventory at that problem, but if you think about it, the further forward you throw inventory, the less likely it is to be able to satisfy that requirement because of that issue of product proliferation and mass customization. So the customer is not necessarily going to order the item that you have produced into finished goods because it doesn't satisfy their requirements. So you necessarily have to go through at least one level of postponement to some kitting level. But that might not be far enough, so you have to go to further back and be able to understand how you can best satisfy their requirements. So this is absolutely critical in being able to have that multi-tier rapid planning capability, which is at the heart of your responsiveness. And if we look at the event management that's related to response management, so many people look at event management as a topic has been around a long time. But a key point of this report from Supply Chain Digest is the fact that if you really look at this decision tree, the key point is that you need to make a decision of whether or not an event has impact on other processes and other goals. Because if you look only narrowly at one particular layer in the supply chain, you have no way of determining the severity of that particular event, and therefore your response to it could be completely incorrect. There might be a slight period when your inventory goes below an expected value. It might look like just a small inventory disparity if you're only looking at your component supply. But if you actually understand the consequence that means that a particular line is going to stop and therefore there's a major order that's not going to be delivered to the customer, that is a very different sense of urgency that you need to apply to that particular situation than the mere fact that you've gone 5% below your lower inventory target or your safety stock. So it's very important to build that out. And this is really the key point, that visibility is necessary, but it's an insufficient requirement for true response management. You really need to be able to see supply chain management and response management as a team sport and bringing the different organizations together. So here we look at inventory, projected inventory at the supplier, the CM, and the customer, and we try to work out whether or not a shortfall, as I described at the supplier, is significant. Do you really need to expend a lot of money expediting inventory to satisfy safety stock when there's no demand for it? I would hazard or suggest that that is not a very sensible course of action. On the other hand, if you're exceeding your upper inventory target, but further down the supply chain you can determine that there's a peak in supply in demand that is driving that increase in inventory, that's a very good thing. So don't go and start shutting off supply. Don't start canceling purchase orders simply because you've exceeded a upper level inventory target. So these are the types of things that are really important. And really what you're looking at is, are these events significant? So significance, as I said, is very much determined about how these events are related. But how can you tell that? Well, you need to be able to understand how that entire supply chain is put together so that you can, in fact, link these different events and understand the consequence of one event on further steps in the supply chain. And if they are connected, you need to be able to identify who can help. So Bill will take you through quite a bit of this as we go through. So response management is all about dynamic supply chain alignment. If we just look at this as some representation of a supply chain where we've got some actuals and we've got the backlog real orders and we've got some forecasts and some representation of the timeline or lead time from certain locations in your supply chain to actual demand, then it's somewhere in the future period in the sense of it's going to be affecting demand in that period. Some event occurs. Then, of course, the person who's directly impacted needs to know, but the first question they need to ask is, what's the impact? Why is this important to me? And who should I contact to be able to help me? In an extended outsourced supply chain, that is not a trivial task. And it is very important in terms of resolution to be able to answer those very quickly. And if we look at that in this particular case, maybe what they identify is that there's an inventory shortfall that's going to occur closer to the actual demand period, but that requires some further action upstream in order to be able to resolve that. If you've got an extended supply chain, then you need to be able to send signals to specific people, not everybody, so that they can all join together in a what-if analysis to be able to resolve this issue, to understand how much impact or how much amelioration they can apply to this particular event to reduce the overall impact on financial metrics or operational metrics. But with that, rushing through very quickly, I wanted to then hand over to Bill so that Bill can give you a demonstration of some of these capabilities and describe to you how RapidResponse can provide many of the capabilities that I have described up to now. Bill, welcome, and over to you.
Sure, thanks, Trevor. I think you'll just need to pass me control. And that looks like we've got control. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. For anybody on the call that has seen RapidResponse today, you'll probably notice that you're not seeing a whole lot of things that are new. But what we'll go over are some of those key capabilities that Trevor talked about with respect to response management. Before we get started, I did hear a very interesting quote last week during a presentation. Somebody borrowed a quote from Sean Payton, who is the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, and Mr. Payton said, "It took me a few years to realize that as soon as the game started, the game plan went out the window." And it's very much like that with response management, that you have to spend that time to come up with a plan, and you might optimize that plan, but all those factors that go into making that optimized plan, we're hearing that they change as soon as the plan is created. And what we're seeing even more today is how volatile those changes can be. So it's really important to be able to know sooner so that you can respond effectively, efficiently, and profitably. So what you're seeing on your screen, something that we call a scorecard, but just imagine that very easily you can get all your data into one place, so that includes demand, supply, capacity, financial information. In this case, we're comparing this baseline data against some key performance metrics. So you could see that the health of your organization. But imagine that you get hit with a change very quickly. You can do that simulation, create a version or a copy of that baseline plan, and then immediately see what the impact would be. So what you're seeing in this new change is just, for example, if this was a demand increase, all of a sudden you got an unexpected order. From a revenue perspective, you could see, obviously that's a good thing to do, but from an on-time delivery perspective, it may be causing some issues. So as soon as you get this change, this can drive a number of things. It's going to drive that the event or the alerts that Trevor talked about. So a lot of times you're not aware that the change has actually happened, so you want to be able to notify those people that need to participate. So the response management piece is different from the planning piece. Typically you'll hear words like optimization when you start to plan. With response management, it becomes more about consensus, and a lot of times it's understanding the trade-offs so that you could take the best action to move forward. And just as easily as you can model and evaluate that change, you want to be able to model and evaluate your resolution to that change. So the resolution could be any number of things, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, anything from expedites or transfers or substitutions or reallocation of limited supply, those types of things. But some people have referred to this as next week's Wall Street Journal. It gives you that forward-looking view so that you can quickly understand the impact of a change and also the impact of resolution. Very quickly, you'll see just some detail behind how easy it is to create those scenarios so that if somebody says, what's the impact of a change, that doesn't mean that that's another meeting that might happen next week. So it could look something like this. What you're seeing here is just a very simple view of orders, so you can see things like the customer and the order line, the due dates, the items, and the quantity. So the change that you model could be anything, but the first step would be able to create that virtual copy or that experiment. And to do that, it might look something like this. So we'll just call this your new change as an example. So as soon as you hit OK, not a trivial thing that's about to happen, you'll create a scenario that looks like that, where you can immediately see the impact. So what you're seeing here is you can see a change happen. You can quickly see that, we created a pretty dramatic change here, and you can start to see that change might not have, it might have affected that individual order, but it could have affected any other node of the supply chain. So you could drill down on any of these. If you select an order and start to drill down, you can start to get visibility in terms of the components that are driving issues. So very easily you can create those scenarios, stack them, and test them. And then in this view, you can certainly look at it from a timing perspective. So it could be a case that decisions are made for the end of the quarter, that you might be making decisions so that you could take advantage of revenue opportunities for the quarter, as an example. The other thing that you can do is you want to create views that are very easy to evaluate information. So you might be creating views, more of a dashboard or a more graphical view, where you can, again, stack these scenarios. You can see, for example, here's some views where you've stacked a number of different scenarios to see what the impacts would be and what resolution might be. And it gives you that drill down to get to the data that you need, or that information you need to make the right decisions moving forward. So very quick demonstration of some of the capabilities, but the idea is that you can go to one place to see both demand and supply so that you can get that rapid rebalancing. Just no sooner the impact of change and the impact of resolution, and invite those people to participate to reach a consensus moving forward. Okay, Trevor, I'll pass that back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill.
Okay.
So what we would like to invite people to do is post some questions in the question and answer session, and then Bill and I will be very happy to answer those. And if we don't have the ready answer, then of course we will come back with you with a more complete answer, either by email or give you a call directly. So please go to the question and answer session in the bottom right-hand side of your view, and type in any questions you might have there. To kick it off, Bill, what I'd like to understand is, what sort of data is required to be able to run this, in the sense that in many systems that people have to do their planning, it tends to be within their own four walls. So what is the advantage of going across organizational boundaries and bringing in data from multiple data sources within the supply chain? An extended supply chain, I want to emphasize that, across organizational boundaries to be able to resolve issues.
That's a great point, Trevor, because in most organizations it's very different from, some years ago where everything was inside the four walls. So a lot of times that data is at a supplier or a contract manufacturer. So it's important to be able to easily consolidate that data into one place. So all that item master, all that bill of material information that typically somebody would own, and they've outsourced that. The real question, though, is what do you do with that data? You don't want it to turn into a data landfill. So not only do you need the data, but you also need the analytic of those different systems. So you might have, different ERP systems and things like that. So that's something else to consider when you start bringing these different supply chain nodes together.
And another question I'd like to follow up on that, Bill, is what is the difference between shipping data between different systems using EDI and what RapidResponse can offer a company in terms of collaboration between two different organizations?
Right. Well, I guess my first thought when I think EDI, I think execution. So, obviously there's a need for it, but there's a lot of reasons to ship data back and forth in the context of collaborative resolution. So now you can get people to participate in what-if analysis and things like that. And the other information that you're sharing would be that tap on the shoulder to say something's changed, and this is the impact of that change, and this is why we need you to participate. So it's just not a flow of data, but it's really a flow of communication when people need to respond. Because we heard one customer say we've got 60,000 people that work in our supply chain, and only 6,000 of them actually work for our company. So it's just not about the data when you're talking response management.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill. I'd like to just expand on that last point you made there, Bill, because I tried to bring that out in my description of the contract manufacturer, the supplier, and the customer with the inventory levels, in that, yes, of course, one would hope that the supply chain would operate fairly smoothly, and one would hope that we could have algorithms that would give some representation of reasonable limits of the inventory, etc., that are placed at different locations up and down the supply chain. The key issue is that most of that data, for example, inventory levels, is based upon historical information, whereas the future is actually highly unpredictable. Given the fact that your forecast is only 50% accurate, now people are putting into place inventory policies and all of this based upon what happened last year. Well, we only have to look at the last 3 years to understand that, in fact, even the supply side is highly volatile, let alone the demand side. So really the responsiveness that you can get is from being able to remove those barriers of information flow up and down the supply chain. And you're not going to get that by simply shifting EDI messages from one layer of the supply chain to another layer. It really requires the human beings to be involved in a discussion and a collaboration, true collaboration. Collaboration isn't about machines talking to each other and exchanging data at that level. Collaboration is really about human beings discussing how they can resolve an issue, but understanding not just a very narrow perspective, but the impact of any decision that they're going to make on other actors within the supply chain. How is it going to affect revenue? How's it going to affect margin? What does that mean in terms of line stoppages? All of these questions need to be able to be satisfied in order for a true collaboration to be reached, because a collaboration is really about compromise. It's a term you used earlier, Bill, and one that I believe in very strongly. In these situations, especially in outsourced supply chains, you've got multiple people who need to collaborate to reach that compromise, because there might not be an ideal solution that satisfies everybody. So how much can we best get the supply chain to operate so that it can provide the best outcome for the customer and therefore the best outcome for all of us in the long term?
Yeah, Trevor, there are a couple questions here, but just to kind of cap that off, that one thing struck me is that it seems like response management is that piece that's been missing between planning and execution. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Supply Chain Digest was absolutely correct. As you mentioned earlier, people have thought that optimization was the best way to generate a plan. But there are two aspects to that I have over the years, because I used to work for another vendor that believed very strongly in supply chain optimization. But over the years, I've come to appreciate much more that it's the responsiveness, it's the capability of being agile that is far more important, because a decision delayed is a decision with little value. So even in planning, it's about being able to understand the consequences of your decisions up and down the supply chain. And when you are using an optimization engine, it's very difficult for people to understand necessarily why those decisions to operate in a certain manner were taken, especially the people on the ground who are actually making decisions. But as importantly, perhaps, is the fact that the ability to change the algorithms by which you run this optimization is timely and very cost prohibitive. But I don't want to leave our audience with the impression that rapid response cannot create a very robust plan. It takes material constraints and capacity constraints into consideration, lead times, minimum order quantities, all of those types of things it takes into consideration, including alternative parts, alternative sourcing. But the essential point is it runs on heuristics aimed at minimizing lateness of orders. And then all of the demand can be striked so that you can now sort your demand based upon the demand that is most profitable. And as a consequence, you'll get a plan that comes out of there that is both most profitable and with minimum lateness. So we have all of that capability. But the really important point is that when the rubber meets the road, when the demand actually comes in and it is not what you had anticipated, you need to be very agile and very responsive in order to be able to capture that demand in its most profitable manner. One terms that I've learned from a colleague are time to detect and time to correct. These are lean principles that are really important. So that's where the responsiveness or the monitoring comes in, being able to determine very, very quickly that something has changed. And a part of that monitoring is being able to understand what the effect is. Is that important? And then the next stage kicks in. How can we most effectively be able to respond to that as a compromise situation across the supply chain? And those capabilities are absolutely associated with anything that you would have done early on in being able to create the plan. But to be responsive, you cannot afford to run an optimization engine that's going to run for 8 hours before it pops out an answer, because your ability to then evaluate alternatives is greatly minimized.
Yeah.
Okay?
Trevor, I'll throw some questions at you that we're getting in, and we can take turns responding. But the first one, when we showed the dashboards, we were showing performance measurements like revenue margins and inventory, and the question was, why not include forecast performance? And that,
well, that would be a very good one. And the dashboard I think that you showed, Bill, was just not one focused necessarily on demand, but must certainly be very easy to throw up a a dashboard element or component that would show what the forecast accuracy is.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think on forecast accuracy, there's something else that needs to be put into place. There's the statistical forecast, and then there's the sales forecast, marketing forecast, etc. So what I found over time is a very good way of measuring all of this is in forecast value add. So you measure the forecast accuracy of each of those elements and determine how much value these different elements are adding to the forecast accuracy. So absolutely true, but let's take it one step further to actually look at where the value add is in that forecasting process.
Yeah, and obviously the dashboard that we put up, you can configure that for, and Trevor pointed out the sales team might have their own dashboard and their own forecast accuracy metrics up there. So certainly, a good point, and that's something that we would include. The other question, Trevor, it's a good one. Is there a common denominator or a combination of denominators in who you see best managing supply chain response?
Oh, gosh. Well, denominator throwing me a little bit there. Characteristics is maybe the best term that I would see to describe what I'm going to talk about anyway. First of all, it's the knowledge of the organization that their forecast is never going to be 100% accurate. Now, I want to always emphasize, folks, I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't forecast. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't plan. But it's that next level of maturity to understand that you're not going to get a perfect forecast, and therefore you're not going to get a perfect plan. So it is those organizations who've understood that I think above all is a characteristic that would indicate their capabilities of moving to that next stage of defining the agile supply chain. And we provide one aspect of that. There's no doubt about it. People need to start looking at contractual terms with contract manufacturers and suppliers, contractual terms with customers, and being able to provide some added agility in their supply chain and physical supply chain. But where we add a lot of capability and where, why many of our customers have come to us is if you've got a week. If a customer comes to you and wants a delivery in a week, when they call you, they have expectations of the delivery date. Every minute you take in deciding how you're going to satisfy that demand is a minute taken away from actually physically satisfying that demand. So if you've got an order to delivery lead time that is 5 days and it takes you 3 days to satisfy or determine how you're going to satisfy that demand, you've now already lost 1 day in your capability of delivering to that. You're going to be 1 day late because you've already taken 3 days out of a 7-day week. So it's very much about compressing that decision lead time in order to be able to give more flexibility to your supply lead time to be able to actually satisfy it.
Yeah, I think part of that too is just knowing sooner. So it gets back to being able to compare different states of the supply chain so that before and after the change happened to know what's changed and who needs to respond. So I think the key word in that question was the combination of denominators. There's a lot of factors in there, but you really have to know. You just can't wait, as you mentioned, Trevor, a few days to find out about the change.
Yes, time to detect, time to correct.
You've got it. Another question, Trevor, that I'll throw at you. Can you touch on the importance of having an off-site location set up for responding in the event of disaster strikes? So, for example, vendor relationships and things like that. And that's certainly, we've had customers that have, shared their experiences after the earthquake happened in Japan and things like that. So it's certainly a question that's come up quite often.
Risk mitigation is a huge part of any supply chain, but there's always a cost that comes with it. Now, the tsunami in Japan, I'm old enough, folks, that, I've got gray hair, and I can say I've only had 2 events, and they've all been fairly soon, the one in Indonesia and now the one in Japan, in which tsunamis have occurred. So those are black swans, and I don't know that one can really put together a supply chain that, or can afford. One can, of course, put that together, put a supply chain together to overcome those situations, but whether one can afford it is a different question. So a lot of what I would look at in that situation is how quickly could you identify alternative supplies of key materials and then be able to redirect demand into those areas in order to be able to satisfy as much of the demand as quickly as possible. But most certainly being able to have alternative sources of supply, so you're not single sourcing, is a key way in which to be able to ameliorate or reduce the risks of such great events. But let's face it, if you look at the semiconductor industry, it is so concentrated in Taiwan and Japan. What are your alternatives? In many cases, the customers would have been very likely, even if they used 3 sources of supply, they would have very likely all been in Japan anyway. So it's very difficult to go all of that way. But of course, multi-sourcing is just good practice, if nothing else, for pricing performance. Okay?
Yeah, and if you look at the pharmaceutical industries and aerospace, where it's difficult to set up that source, it's likely something that they're starting to think about more than they may have before.
Yes, and it's good you brought up the pharmaceutical industry, because the costs of getting regulatory compliance approval for multiple sources of supply is going to be prohibitively expensive. So in that case, it probably makes it non-feasible.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, if we're done then, Bill, then
yeah.
What I'd just like to move on, folks. Just a quick view of some of our customers. Many of our customers are highly referenceable. If you know people within these organizations, please feel free to pick up the phone and contact them. Certainly we'd be only happy to make some of those introductions if you wish. But I'd like to close the call by saying thank you very much for your participation. My contact details and those of Bill are on the slide, and we most certainly will be distributing the slides to the participants. So please feel free to get hold of these, contact us for any further follow-up on the questions or any other questions you might have. Okay? Thank you very much for everybody, and have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.